I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And in this video, we're going to get into a lot. And I'm going to do what I've been attempting to do for some time now and explain the Idaho 4 case. I mean, in a high level form from top to bottom. And by the time this video is done, if you make it to the end, then you may start to even understand why I feel so strongly about all of the Jack D and the frat boy nonsense. Hopefully you can understand where I'm coming from by the end of this. And one thing is interesting is whenever I put out a video, if I don't toe the line, I mean down to the line, wow, people will take it and run into left field. I put out a video yesterday that was, I felt like, undeniable. I mean, we've got court records and documents putting Bryan Kohberger at the ATM. I've done 50 videos of it. What got me looking at it sideways is because I've done 50 videos of it. I've always put Kohberger at the ATM based on the court record. And it never made sense to me that Kohberger would be going south past that gas station at 9:12. I knew that. That's been in the FBI report this entire time. As I mentioned, they dropped it from self-authenticating records, the state did. So I always assumed that they just had a blurry image of a white car that they were misidentifying as Kohberger, and they realized it and dropped it. So when that video footage came out, and I was able to clearly look at that car, and I'm very familiar with the features of a car. And if you put somebody in a car on Sunday morning 100 feet from a known location where we know they're at, then it's undoubtedly Kohberger's car, in my humble opinion. Now, there could be a 1 in a billion chance, I guess, another car drove past like that, but I don't think it's likely, and I don't think it's even relevant, because there's no way that vehicle went to the King Road neighborhood as everybody has suggested, including law enforcement. They've never really suggested it. They've said that his vehicle, or that his cell data was picked up by the tower that provides coverage to the King Road residents. All the other guilters and mainstream morons and minions took that as he went to the residence. Well, we know that didn't happen, because there's no way, and I mean no way, to get from going south of that gas station to the King Road neighborhood without passing all the same cameras that caught the vehicle the night before. I mean, he would have been caught on Paradise, Ridge. I mean, there's many cameras, 1112, Linda Lane. None of those cameras caught that vehicle, so it never went to the neighborhood. Where I was sideways on it is because I believe that that wasn't his vehicle this entire time, and seeing it with my own two eyes, I went, well, that is him. Why is he going south right there? And people have made good points. If he turned by the police station, they should have video of that, but they don't. Every piece of video has been documented in this case. We're not going to see any video that comes out that it wasn't documented. It's all in the FBI report. And even the additional videos that isn't in the FBI report, like Floyd Cannabis Shop, is in self-authenticating records. There isn't going to be any unknown videos. So once again, we know they've collected videos from Gypsy Java. They have all the video of Gypsy Java after 5 a.m., conveniently. So if that vehicle would have continued south, it would have hit Gypsy Java. We know it didn't go towards King Road neighborhood because of all the things that I've just described with the Paradise, the Ridge cameras, the 1112, Linda Lane. None of those would have captured the vehicle. So the only route that I could see that he went was past the police station. And he could have been just, making a loop around there because traffic was blocked off to go directly to the ATM. I don't know. That wasn't my point. My point was, to me, looking at the situation, I thought that he went to the ATM to make a withdrawal. By seeing him going south past that gas station, my thoughts were, well, he could have been picking up some money and making a deposit. Now, we'll not know until they release documents on, Kohberger's activity at that ATM. Did he make a deposit or did he make a withdrawal? So I'll reserve judgment until I find out if he made a withdrawal or a deposit on, what that could mean. But it's immaterial regardless. The key to this case is all of this released footage and identifying the vehicle. Firmly identifying the vehicle as a 2011 to 13 Hyundai Elantra, just like the FBI did. Because once that's done, then there is actually a case for Bryan Kohberger. As I'm going to show you in this video, though, if that is not done, then you can pull every kind of scenario till you're blue in the face, and it will not make a difference in a court of law. And I will prove that to you undoubtedly in this video. As sad as it sounds, that is going to be the key factor, because it's already a key factor in the court record, and any appeal would revert to the ruling, and the ruling states why the original rulings were denied. And any appellate court, in my humble opinion, will back up that denial without evidence of the contrary. And I will make it all clear by the end of this video. But before I get into that, people have been at, wait, Bob, you say you got it all figured out. You got it all figured out. Why you won't tell us? We think you're just speculating and making up stuff. Okay, well, that's fine. When I think of speculating and making up stuff, when I see the Jack D and the frat stuff, that's, in my opinion, speculating and making up stuff. I watched, I guess it was about 5 hours of Lana last night, going through all of the body cam that was released. And well, I'll tell you one thing about Lana. She is very, very perceptive on fine details. She's very good at that. And I have a lot of respect for her, because when she sees something that's very logical, she says it. For instance, when Jack D's in the back of the police car and they open the door and they say, are you just waiting on your dog? He says, no, I'm not waiting on the dog. I don't know what's going on. I mean, he's obviously distraught. And she pointed out, there you go, folks. I mean, leave Jack D alone, this poor kid. No kidding. There is nothing in the police reports, if you follow them to fruition, that indicates that any of those youngsters had anything to do with the crime, at least on a actual having something to do with the crime level. Now, we can speculate till the cows come home on who might have been inside or complicit. But what I want to do for you in this video is, once again, I've done it once and it just went right over most people's heads, but I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to do it in a very high level way that should explain to you everything you need to know about this case. This is not a case of fraternities going in and doing this. I mean, these are grown-ups, folks. These are grown-ups doing grown-up types of things with their grown-up types of businesses that they should not even be in business with. But let me give you a high-level view of everything you need to know about this case, and then we'll get into the low-level, finer details. Hold on to your hats, folks, because I intend to blow it off your head. We've documented through arrests and FBI surveillance reports that the Aryan family, whose members and associates were arrested from December 9th, 2022 to March 27th, 2023. And they were trafficking large quantities of narcotics by bringing them from Arizona to Seattle and Tacoma, transporting them to Spokane, and then distributing across Washington into Idaho and even up to Alaska, according to the arrest reports. During this exact time, the parents of two of the victims in this case, both Ben and his wife, as well as Ms. Kernodle, are arrested for major charges, and more importantly, their trials were coming near as all of this came to fruition. Now, a key trafficking route for the Omerta cell of the Aryan family, led by Gil, is across I-90 into Spokane. It is likely from extensive research that Spokane Valley was the drop-off point of the narcotics, and some of the associates that assisted in getting the narcotics from Spokane into Idaho was likely, verified through arrest records, Ben and Corey more than likely using Kara as their mule. Now, Gil, who the FBI claims was making millions of dollars during this time frame trafficking, he can be verified in Spokane Valley on August 15th, 2022, purchasing a $120,000 BMW. Not bad. Now, the court record verifies that both Ben and Corey, as well as Kara's charges, were reduced tremendously around August 30th, 2022, indicating that they were likely working with law enforcement. Not so coincidentally, around this exact same time, a guy named Farley was arrested for trafficking. Now, this is no small feat considering the quantity that he had with him when he was arrested, and the fact that he is labeled at the time as a transient. Typically, transients don't have that type of volume. But more importantly, the same day that Farley is arrested, the same time that the charges are reduced for both Ben and Corey as well as Kara, not so coincidentally, the same day, the OCD ETF, which is the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, operated by U.S. attorneys in their respective divisions, like Josh Hurwitz, the prosecutor for the Kohberger case, they are provided with information from an unnamed confidential informant, and on that very date, wiretaps are issued for Gil and his crew. If he's in Spokane Valley on August 15th, and then by August 30th, a confidential informant has given information to start a wiretap, and that's exactly the time that the charges are reduced on the parents' cases, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to put two and two together. More evidence of this is the obvious protection detail that is seen sitting outside the Spokane Valley residence of Ben and Corey in October of 2022. Not so coincidentally, the Omerta boys, who is documented making many trips to Arizona and back using the Oregon-California route, is documented traveling on a one-time odd trip to Boise, Idaho on October the 19th, 2022, less than 3 weeks till the atrocity on King Road. Among trafficking groups like this, territory is always important. Considering that the Aryan family controls Washington and the Aryan Knights control Idaho, a hit would need to go through the proper control and authority of that territory, which not so coincidentally is operated out of Boise, Idaho. A likely solution to the territory issue is a man who spent years in both the prisons of Washington and Idaho. Mowich, a man previously unknown until the release of the police reports, fit that bill perfectly. Final verification of this came on December 3rd, 2022, when none other than Gill and Slocum traveled under the radar without detection from the watchful eye of the FBI, all the way from Shelton, Washington to Lewiston, Idaho, to attend the funeral of Mowich. This is the final piece to the puzzle. Until you understand that part, it's always going to hinder in digging into the fine details of what happened on November 13th, 2022, because that is the high-level overview. That is the reason behind this, and that points to one of the actual assailants. The rest is going to come from there. But you may ask yourself, well, but Pavarotti, if that's really the case, well, why would they even go through prosecuting Bryan Kohberger? As I've showed you through the police records, especially as it relates to Gun Rack Guy and how it is copy and pasted into the probable cause affidavit and the time frames of when they say the atrocity happened that doesn't coincide with the times that the vehicle is driving around, tells you that this case is much less transparent than you even thought. You see, the most opaque case in the history of cases is even more opaque than we can possibly imagine. And that's only determined after you come to the conclusion that law enforcement had two assailants that they believe committed this atrocity and a getaway driver. And that is their actual case that they do not want to disclose to the public. But two of those assailants that they believe committed the atrocity, one I don't agree with, but I believe that's what they believe, are no longer living. And that creates an issue when you get to the prosecution stage of a case like this. Now, why wouldn't they want the world to know about this? As I've said many times, if you have 4 college students unalived because of a prison gang that's trafficking narcotics, you wouldn't send your kids anywhere near that school. You may not send them to WSU because it's within 10 miles of it. So a one-off Ted Bundy is the obvious solution to that PR problem. However, I don't believe they ever expected this case to become as big as it actually got, and they were forced to hide things in plain sight. And when you have eyes to see, you can see how they have hidden things in plain sight. But here is the first thing that you have to understand about the assailants in this case, and the fact that everybody in this case that was involved in this case knew about those assailants. They just never said it. None of the conspiracies and the rhetoric and the narrative has ever once been described by law enforcement or the prosecution. When they get into theory of the case and find details, what do they continuously say? And it's what they've said from the beginning, is we don't have a working theory, here are the facts. Everything else that you've heard since the beginning of this case came from the minds of morons in the media, never from the state. But here's why the state keeps their mouth shut. Imagine if your 2 prime suspects in the case are no longer living, you want to keep everything quiet, and you're looking for one suspect who's driving a car. There is no Idaho statute for charging a dead person with unaliving because it is legally impossible to prosecute someone who is deceased. This principle is consistent throughout the entire U.S. legal system, including Idaho. And why a dead person cannot be charged? A criminal trial requires a defendant. For a criminal case to proceed, there must be a living person to prosecute. Once a suspect dies, a criminal case against them is dropped. and the charges are dismissed. Now, you have a right to a defense, and a deceased individual cannot participate in their own defense, which violates their constitutional right to a fair trial and to face their accuser in court. And the final point is no punishment is possible. The purpose of a criminal conviction is punishment and rehabilitation. Since a dead person cannot be punished by the state, there's no legal purpose for a criminal trial. So if their two main suspects are no longer alive and they cannot bring charges against them, why would that town want to even mention them? So once you understand what the state believes, and everybody in the case, down to the judge and the defense, knew about this, and we see remnants of that in trial.
I don't think probable cause is in a vacuum. I think probable cause isn't one thing. I hope it's not one thing. I hope there has to be a little bit more than one thing, especially when you've got another thing that's the same as the one thing.
Well, I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway, because you brought up blood DNA of an unknown individual that was found, I think, on the handrail.
Yes.
Doesn't that necessarily not exclude Mr. Kohberger? What it may do is suggest there might be a potential other person in addition involved, if you assume that that blood was related to the victims and not some earlier event in the house.
If what the court is saying is exactly why the magistrate needed to know that. Is there another explanation here? I've got this sheath, but there are all these other things that if I know about them matter. What's the other explanation? What's going on with this investigation? What's happening here? That's exactly the point, Your Honor. What other explanation is there? The magistrate wasn't given a chance to ask that. She wasn't given a chance to ask that when she wasn't told about unknown male B, blood on the handrail. She wasn't given a chance to ask about that when she wasn't told about unknown male D, blood on a glove right outside the residence. She wasn't given a chance to ask any of those questions. She didn't know that Bryan's car, and the court's question, good question, what does that mean? Could it mean there's more than one person? The answer to that is, or it could mean it's not Bryan because his car's got nothing in it and there were only 13 minutes to do this.
A reasonable magistrate, let alone any magistrate, wouldn't find probable cause there, even if they knew all those other facts.
Imagine if we knew then what we know now. Ann Taylor was specifically focused on two samples, blood on the handrail and blood on the glove of unknown perpetrators. Now, when we look at all the evidence that they actually had in this case, and only one piece of the evidence they suggested tied Bryan Kohberger to the crime, which was the DNA on the back of the knife sheath, or the DNA on the button snap, the touch DNA on the button snap. And Ann Taylor is only talking about two unknown male DNAs that were blood, and that was blood on a glove and blood on a handrail. What does the laws of deduction tell us? If they're only focused in that hearing on three pieces of evidence, blood on a glove, blood on a handrail of an unknown individual, and then the DNA on the knife sheath is supposedly tied to Bryan Kohberger, what does it tell us about all of this other DNA, such as the mixture found on the back of the sheath, such as the swabs taken from Kernodle's bedroom, DNA found under Mogan's fingernails, DNA from fingernails of all the other victims, as well as swabs taken above the stairwell at the residence, the upper floor banister, the bottom of the handrail at the scene of the crime. DNA sample taken from the north wall of the stairwell at the residence, another sample from the half wall at the residence, DNA from the sample taken from the door of Miss Mogan's bedroom, right? What about all of that DNA? It obviously wasn't unknown because it wasn't described by Ann Taylor. Apparently, they knew who that DNA belonged to, but there was two DNAs that the defense was focused in on that did not belong to whoever's DNA the rest belonged to, and that was the unknown individual. What she was doing was pointing to the DNA on the sheath, a movable object, and comparing it to the two pieces of DNA that was still unknown. The judge's reply was that doesn't make Kohberger any less culpable. It just means there was more than one assailant. And Taylor's reply was, you can't take one thing without considering the other things. You've got to think deep on this one.
Well, I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because you brought up blood DNA of an unknown individual that was found, I think, on the handrail.
Yes.
Doesn't that necessarily not exclude Mr. Kohberger? What it may do is suggest there might be a potential other person in addition involved.
Then you'll understand why it's so important for suspect vehicle to be identified as not Bryan Kohberger's car, to have a chance to get justice for that young man. And the judge puts the proof in the pudding in his order on defendant's offer of proof for alternate perpetrators. In accordance with the court's subsequent order on the motion, defendant filed his offers of proof and evidence in support, identifying 4 individuals as potential alternate perpetrators. The state objects to the presentation of this evidence at trial, arguing it fails to satisfy the standard under Meister. What is the judge's main reason for denying it because it didn't satisfy the standard under Meister? What is the standard? The court concludes that at this time, defendant's alternate perpetrator proffer is inadmissible under Meister, as it is irrelevant and or excluded by IRE 403. Here's the real reason that the judge denied the motion. Meister clarified that the Idaho rules of evidence, rather than one of the more onerous Larson standard, control alternate perpetrator evidence admissibility. And what's the key in Meister? We've gone over it many times. Under these rules, evidence is relevant if it has any tendency to make the existence of any fact that is of consequence to the determination of the action more probable or less probable than it would be without the evidence. Let's read this again, folks, because this is the key to Meister. Under these rules, evidence is relevant if it has any tendency to make the existence of any fact that is of consequence to determination of the action more probable or less probable than it would be without the evidence. So what it's basically saying is if you bring forth alternate perpetrators, you still have to be able to have that evidence make Bryan Kohberger's role in it non-existent. You can't bring forth alternate perpetrators without addressing the car and the person driving the car. And he goes on to make that very clear. Meister further offered the following guidance on applying these rules and determining whether proffered alternate perpetrator evidence is relevant and admissible. The evidence is not relevant because it does not tend to make the defendant's involvement more probable or less probable than it is within the trial court's discretion to find the evidence inadmissible. The evidence that Kohberger has to have to get a fair shake is evidence that does not tend to make the defendant's involvement more or less probable. And he goes on to give the final key to that right here. The fact that these individuals lived within walking distance to the crime scene is not probative evidence, given that the perpetrator drove a vehicle to the crime scene. Further, none of these individuals drove a matching vehicle that matches the description of the suspected unalivers. And you can just say match the description of the person that was driving the car. that they have no idea if he was involved in the actual crime or not. But for Kohberger to be able to get around and get a fair trial, he'll have to be able to prove in some way that he was not the person driving the vehicle, because any appeal is going to defer to Meister, in that he could come out with the evidence that says, look, Mowich and Kopaka are the actual assailants. Dead to rights, we could come up with that evidence. But if we're unable to prove that it wasn't Bryan Kohberger driving the car, it would fall on deaf ears because of the Idaho Rules of Evidence 401, 402, and 403 specifically. It has to make the defendant's involvement more probable or less probable. And because the judge has already ruled with this language, any appellate court, in my opinion, will defer to this language. And specifically, the perpetrator drove a vehicle to the crime scene, and they believe it was a white Hyundai Elantra. That's why it's so important to identify that vehicle as not being Bryan Kohberger's for him to get a fair shake. Because once it's in the ruling by the judge, the appellate courts will defer to the ruling, why it was ruled on, and if you can't overcome that, it's immaterial, even if you have rock solid evidence that other people committed the crime, because they already knew other people committed the crime.
Well, I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway, because you brought up blood DNA of an unknown individual that was found, I think, on the handrail.
Yes.
Doesn't that necessarily not exclude Mr. Kohberger? What it may do is suggest there might be a potential other person in addition involved.
So it seems to me to have an impact, there are two keys, two different ways to do it. Number one is by taking what's been given to us with this released video and actually verifying that that vehicle that is driving around the night of the atrocity is not Bryan Kohberger's car. And the FBI gave us a roadmap to determining how to tell the difference. It's in their FBI report. And they tell you the difference between an 11 and 13 and a 14 to 16 and other year models for that matter. For the similarities between the 2011 to 13 and the 14 to 16, it's right here. The similar class characteristics include, but are not limited to, the overall body shape, the window configuration, side trim headlight shape, front grille configuration, and rear license plate position. That is what identifies an 11 to 16 from all other models out there. So that would be a way to focus in on, in the videos, what is a Hyundai Elantra and what's not between the year models of 11 to 16. But specifically, the difference between the 13 and the 14, 15, and 16 is the rear bumper reflector and the shape of the fog lights on the Elantra. Those are the main differences between the 13 and the 15, is the rear bumper reflectors, shape of the fog lights. All the other things will differentiate the 11 to 16 from other models of other makes. So when we look at this, right here we have pictures of Kohberger's vehicle in these three slots. These other slots are stock photos of a 2013 Hyundai Elantra. When determining the difference between the vehicles, and this bug shield was obviously added after the atrocities, because the video footage of Kohberger driving around in Lewiston and Clarkston going to the Costco and Albertsons shows his vehicle without this front bug guard on it. And we know it's his vehicle because you see him get out and walk into the grocery store. So to know the real differences though between these models, it is very, very small. And there are only three actual differences. The first one is the way this grill right here is molded. You can see in the 2013, the mold is not deep. It molds right into the grill. On the 2014, the grill is much more pronounced and it's deeper. They modified it ever so slightly. The other differences are the fog lamps. Whether they actually have a fog lamp or not, it's still going to be in this general configuration with the teardrop look, versus the 14 to 16 is going to have this much more pronounced reservoir for the fog lamps. So that is one major difference when looking at it from the front. A slight difference in the grille right here. And the only other difference to differentiate these vehicles is what we have discussed. And this isn't me figuring all this out. This was actually Get a Clue. He was very sharp in these details. But you can see on the 14 to 16, like I discussed in a video the other day, these rear bumper reflectors are on the back of the 2014 to 16, and they're facing flat, meaning they're facing straight out, which means they reflect light at more of an angle. Where in the 11 to 13 models, the rear reflectors were actually inserted into this little thing down here. I believe they call it a, I can't remember the name for it. Starts with a D. But they were inserted into this little area and they were angled down, which makes their reflective abilities have less of an angle for light. So light coming in from above is not going to make these reflect, or it is going to make these reflect because of the angle of the reflectors. Now I know people say, well, you got to take into account the angles of the streets. Well, yeah, you do. But regardless if this vehicle is on a flat or inclined surface, it's still going to have less of an angle than this vehicle that's mounted flat. So when identifying these vehicles, the FBI again gave us the key. It's the rear bumper reflector and the front fog lamps are the two main things. Also, the grille configuration is slightly different. But to determine the difference between these vehicles and other makes and models, the FBI gave us a sound blueprint. One is going to be the side moldings that you see right here and right here. That will differentiate the Elantra from other vehicles, but the main thing is this window configuration. And it's the rear part of the window configuration that makes it very unique. And you can see how it comes back almost to a point, where other models are going to have, for instance, the undercover police officer's vehicle. It comes back to a similar point, but then it has an angle down right here before it comes around. It doesn't come to this arrow point like you'll see on all these models. Now, the window configuration is going to be the same on the 14 to 16 as it is the 11 to 13. But determining the difference between an Elantra and other models is, from the side, going to be these two moldings, and the window configuration is the main key. To determine the difference between the 13 and the 14s, it's going to be the front grille, fog lamps, rear bumper reflectors. That's going to be key, y'all. The other thing in this case, though, for people that are diving into police reports, is to understand the importance of dates. Once you understand the importance of dates and you identify 3 key dates, then it'll help you identify the police reports that are actually important in this case. The 3 key dates are going to be November 23rd, 2022, December 14th, 2022, and then obviously December 19th, 2022. So if you're focusing on police reports, you should focus on them that coincide with these dates. And why are these dates so important? We've already determined that on November 23rd, 2022, that's when Farley's arrested up in Spokane. I've showed you the documentation and the police reports where they started investigating Farley immediately. That's also the date that they identified the DoorDash driver, and it wasn't because she came forward. They finally identified her, as I've gone through this with you, because they did a tower dump, located a couple of phones that were active that they couldn't identify. They had to do another Google geofence warrant to even be able to identify the usernames of those two active phones. And then through additional warrants, they uncovered at least one of the names of those users, and it was Molly Metherson. And we've never, we don't know if they uncovered the other one. There was two of them that was unidentified that was active in that area. So November 23rd, they uncovered Molly. They got to Farley, and that's also the date that they received all of the DNA samples and everything else on Mowich from the Spokane coroner. So that'll be key date number 1. Key date number 3, obviously, is the date they say they got Bryan Kohberger's name and focused in on him. But key date number 2 is going to be December the 14th, 2022, because we know that's the date that they unalived Kopaka. And it's also the date of one of the only police reports that I can find where they actually did any type of investigating into one of the parents in the case, if you can believe that. But let me point out something about Kara here that's very interesting. You see, when she was arrested on November the 17th for her new charges, she was kept in that Kootenai County Jail. When you go through the distribution of events here, though, you'll see that come December 1st, they were talking about conditions of bail or release. And then they waived their preliminary hearing and vacated a preliminary hearing. And then on December 2nd, they have a comment in here and it says to defendant OR release. That means they were releasing her on her own recognizances, probably to go to the funerals of the victims. But that was December 2nd, 2022, when they released her. But she had to come back for a arraignment hearing on December the 14th, 2022, in district court up in Kootenai. And you can see the hearing was held. So they released her on December 2nd on her own recognizances. She had to actually come back into court on December 14th. Something else happened to her on December 14th, apparently when she came back into court, because that was the day that they got her cell phone from her and wanted to download her cell phone activity. And you can see in this police report that was actually dated December 19th, 2022, but on December 14th, 2022, interestingly enough, the date that she went into court, he was requested to complete a forensic extraction on an iPhone provided by Kara Kernodle. Kernodle signed a consent to search form for the device, and it was provided to me by FBI Special Agent Travis Shirley. The form has been uploaded to the case file. The phone was powered on. I placed it in airplane mode to protect any potential evidence on the phone from being removed or remotely deleted. I took photos of the device and attached them to the case file. The phone required a passcode to access the data on the device. Kernodle provided a passcode of whatever it was. And they just go on to talk about how they downloaded the rest of the information on that device. So you got to ask yourself, on December 14th, the date that Kopaka was unalived, that's also a date that they're trying to associate Kara Kernodle's phone with somebody. Key dates in this case are key to finding the truth. I just want to finish with, I was watching my guy Outcast last night, and man, I've got so much that I'm looking into right now, and you're so much better with the digital stuff than I am. But what you were talking about with a gun rack guy and coordinating it with the DoorDash driver, it'd be cool to see like a side-by-side view of the 1112 footage along with, the 1330 Linda Lane footage when we hear gun rack guy and everything going on with that. And then seeing how it coordinates with the DoorDash driver pulling in and everything around that. But, it's just a suggestion. you know me, I try to be as helpful as I can to everybody out there to just get people closer to the truth. Just what I want is the truth. But please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.